It's Thursday, March 5th, sixth day of the war against Iran, Operation Epic Fury, as it's called in the United States, or Roaring Lion, as it's called here in Israel. And as the bombings continue across Iran, led by the Israeli Air Force and the U.S. military, also here in Israel, there are still sirens. I, for one, was woken up early this morning with my family, a siren here in Jerusalem. But people across the country, from the north to the south, continue to hear sirens, rockets and debris continue to fall, and lack of clarity of where this is all going, how long will it last. But one thing that we do know is that Iran is weaker than it was just 6 days ago. Its military has been pretty much decimated, its navy destroyed, its ballistic missiles is not what it once was, and we're seeing that here in Israel and hearing it from military commanders that their ability to fire these missiles towards us is in decline. And as a result, Israel is considering relaxing some of the restrictions by the Home Front Command, allowing people to gather, to go back to work, to go to the gym, to maybe, hopefully for those of us with kids, even go back to school. I check in today with two of my JPPI colleagues, Gil Troy and Shmuel Rosner, to get their pulse of how this war is going. What does it say about the Israel-U.S. relationship, and particularly the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has been pretty quiet throughout this war? Why? What does it mean? Is he being careful not to step on anyone's toes in Washington, where he knows that the real decisions about how long this will take, what the tempo will be, as Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has said, and what will come and how it will end? Will there be regime change, or will it end a long time before that? But there are other questions. How is the Israeli people? How are they coping with this? And what is this war? How does it tie into Benjamin Netanyahu's calculations about elections? Shmuel also reveals some new findings from a JPPI poll about the level of support for this operation and this war among American Jews. Very different than polling among the American public, as well as different than polling of Israelis and how they almost overwhelmingly support the continuation of this war. Lots to unpack, lots to talk about. Stay with us. Gil and Shmuel, it's great to have you both on the podcast, and we've been following over the last week, almost now a week in, kind of how this war has been proceeding. In Israel, we're recording midday, day 6 of the war, and rockets and missiles and sirens still sound. We were just alerted. I was woken up here in Jerusalem very early this morning. There was now another siren in the center of the country. So this does continue, but there's no question when we look at, from a military perspective at least, everybody's talking about how there is a decline in missile fire. Iran is having more difficulty in able to fire off the same amount of missiles, for example, that we saw in the 12-day war back in April and October of 2024 in those first 2 rounds that we had with them. And there's already talk of reopening of different public institutions. The gym in my neighborhood is reopening tomorrow, as an example, right? El Al is going to start renewing some flights, not just bringing people back, but also taking people out, 50 at a time. So you're starting to see a relaxing of restrictions. And I don't expect anyone here to have the exact operational assessment of how the war is proceeding. But it does seem, and I'm curious what you both think, that for the time being, it's going quite well for Israel, right? Gil, what are your thoughts?
Let's take a bigger step back and say where we were 880 days ago on October 7th and see how much the Middle East has changed. Even the Washington Post had a big article about this today, saying just that the situation geopolitically for Israel is much, much stronger, much, much better. It's always dangerous to pronounce the end of a war in the middle of a war, and especially at the very, very start of a war. And it's interesting, we're getting all kinds of things. I think Trump said this could be 3-4 weeks. We Israelis, we're still stuck in the 6-day war mentality. We want it over. We want to go back to school. We want to go back to work. But regardless of the ultimate end game, I think the degree to which we have successfully degraded Iran's threat to us and Iran's power is huge. And especially when we see how strong they seemed October 6th and October 7th, when we see how dominant they seem to be. And I actually think, again, if we just take a step back historically, the key moment in the fall of certainly Khomeini, and we hope his regime, but Khomeini's no longer with us, I would say is April 13th, April 14th, 2024, when Iran finished the Iran-Iraq war and Khomeini came to power and built the regional dominance that he did it by proxy. October 7th was by proxy. Hezbollah was Iran proxy. Houthis, the whole thing was Iran by proxy. And on April 13th, Iran pressed that button and they attacked Israel directly. And I think a lot of the weakness of Iran, certainly the 12-day war, and now this war, is a result of Iran going directly in when they just didn't have that ability. And so I'm not arrogant enough to predict success, nor will I celebrate like they do at the end of the in the end goal with a touchdown just now. But day by day, every time we're limiting the nuclear and ballistic power of Iran and weakening the regime, it's a good thing, not just for Israel, not just for America, but for the world.
And I think there's no doubt, right, that back on October 7th, had we sat here and said, with that trauma that everybody was experiencing at the time, and said, in 2.5 years, Khamenei would be dead, Iran would be completely degraded, Sinwar would be dead, Nasrallah would be dead, and we'd be talking, and I'd be half joking and half serious that my gym is reopening tomorrow, right? It would have sounded strange, but that's definitely the reality that we're in. And so Shmuel, with all that said, and yes, there is what to be proud of, and there is the success and the air dominance and the partnership with America and the involvement here of the U.S. is a whole other huge story in of itself. But what we kind of are missing to some extent is, what are the objectives really here? Where is this going? What do we, and we have America that we can't ignore. We don't exactly know what Trump wants out of this. We don't really know what Bibi wants out of this. He's not really talking to anybody in Israel. So I'm curious how you see that element of what's happening.
Well, as Gil said, we clearly we overestimated Iran's strength, and the Iranians overestimated their own strengths. And what we've seen in the past 3 years is that Iran was not and is not as strong as we and they thought they were. Now, well, can this be transitioned into a situation in which Iran is no longer a threat at all to the region? Can there be regime change in Iran? I think that's the big question everybody is asking. I think that's the golden goose. If you want the most ambitious objective, that would be the objective. Then again, I think both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu understand that they might need to settle for less than immediate regime change. Regime change can come tomorrow or next week. It can also come gradually with a long process of degradation of the ability of the regime to control the Iranian people. So we might see a situation in which at some point the US and Israel decide that Iran had been weakened enough by military force, and now we need to let the Iranian people do their thing and let this process begin. In such case, we won't immediately see an achieving of the ultimate objective, which is regime change. What we'll see is a weakened Iran trying to come up with some kind of a new arrangement for stability. And this could result in just a weakened Iran with the current regime or slightly different regime, and it can become ultimately a complete regime change, and Iran becoming something different. Now, what is a different Iran? That's another question. We all want Iran to become a democratic like Belgium and peace-loving like Denmark. But when you look at the Middle East, you don't see many such countries. So maybe envisioning an Iran that is Western European in outlook or Australian or Canadian, maybe that's too ambitious. Maybe what we are going to see there is something in between a revolutionary, oppressive regime and Western democracy. It will not be this nor that, and that would be good enough for us, especially so if the foreign policy of, look, for Israelis and Americans, it is of course important to see the Iranian people freed from oppression. We all wish them well, and we would like to see them as, having their own ability to live their own lives freely from any oppression. But for us as a country, the interest is to eliminate the revolutionary ambitions of the regime in this region. If Iran is becoming internally still somewhat oppressive, but externally, peaceful, for Israel, that's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, listen, look at our peace that we have with Egypt, look at our peace that we have with Jordan, right? We're not looking to turn either of those countries into Belgium or Denmark, but would we prefer that? Of course. But I mean, we also recognize the reality and the regimes and the people and the nature of the Middle East itself. But, one thing that I think is very different here, and if we go back to the 12-day war in June, so Israel starts it obviously with permission from Donald Trump to be able to go ahead and launch the what we call in Hebrew Am Kilavi, but the 12-day war. It ends with the famous B-2 bombers that come in to take out the hardened nuclear sites, and then pretty much right after that it wraps up, and Donald Trump says to Bibi, "We're done," right? And even famously calls Bibi and says, "Bring back the planes that were on their way to retaliate for a violation of the ceasefire by Iran with one last missile." Here, and that was when it was pretty much the Israeli show, right? It was just an American kind of little interruption, brief, with the B-2 bombers. And in addition, on top, here it's a very merged operation, right? It's American and Israeli officers sitting together, planning together, identifying targets together, engaging together, refueling one another. There's a division of, who's taking what part of the country to some extent, but very much a merged operation. And you listen to people like Pete Hegseth, I was listening to him yesterday at the Pentagon, and they've been giving these almost daily briefings, and he, wow, this guy is something else. He loves he loves it, right? I mean, he's so into it. But he said something very interesting. Obviously Israel's a partner, unlike some of our other allies. He said this on Monday, who hem and haw or whatever, some other thing, and they don't really put skin in the game. Israel does, and they're reliable. But then he also said, we set the tempo. We will decide how long this continues. And there's one guy who will decide when it's over, and his name is Donald Trump. And maybe that explains to some extent why we're not hearing so much from Netanyahu, right? He's relatively quiet because he knows that whatever he says might actually step on somebody's toes back in Washington in the Oval Office. So he just wants to play it safe for now. And he understands the tempo is being set there. The decision on timeline is being set there. I can hope and pray this carries on for as long as possible because, like you both just said, the more they're weak, the weaker they are, the better we're off, even if there isn't a regime change right away. But I'm curious, Gil, when you think of that dynamic between Trump and Netanyahu right now, this is an asset, it's a liability, it's a mix of both.
Anybody who thinks they can predict what Donald Trump is going to do or say or feel has a crystal ball that I lack. And I think Netanyahu is aware of that. So I think you're right that there is a kind of caution that Netanyahu is having. By the way, we should emphasize, I think, the great gift that the Iranian regime has given to Israel and to the Jewish people, which is attacking the UAE and Bahrain, and now I just understand Azerbaijan and Saudi Arabia, and, because no matter what Tucker Carlson yells and screams, those actions undermine the claim that this is just Israel's war. And by, first of all, creating this bizarre situation where we're now basically on the side with the Gulf states, and I think even Turkey might be on our side. The regional dynamics are changing very dramatically, but I think that is a great gift to Israel because it says this is a much bigger issue, and it shows the evil of the regime, and it shows the viciousness of the regime, and it shows the lack of reliability of the regime. So I think Netanyahu is being very smart in keeping quiet. Again, as always, we want a little more of a conversation here within Israel so that Israelis can have a sense of what's going on and feel good. But we should also point out the great gift of this this operation is unity in Israel. And to have a unified Israel and to have a clarity on the war are two very, very important things in terms of the domestic politics. And they will allow us, I think, to navigate the end game, which, of course, is very unclear, with much greater effectiveness and stability.
I'm going to get to local domestic politics. We're going to do that a bit later. I want to save the hard stuff for the end. But
yeah, war is easy. Domestic
right,
politics is
war is easy. But I want, on the heels of just what you were saying, and what we're talking about, Trump, Netanyahu, or U.S.-Israel relationship here, there is a big question in the U.S. about the legitimacy of this war. There was a vote late last night. It was Wednesday night, Washington time, in the middle of the night here in Jerusalem, in the Senate, where they tried to put limitations on the president's war powers. That did fail, and it did not pass across the Senate. But it's been a big debate, of course, whether it's legal what the president did. It's not legal. And, I mean, what I say, I was talking with a Democrat friend the other day, and I was like, listen, I'm all good for criticism of everybody. But, like, were you critical when Barack Obama went to bomb Libya for, I think it was 65 or 70 days and didn't go to Congress? So, like, let's just be, honest about our criticism and where it is, and not just against Donald Trump. But I'm not even getting into that. My question more is to you, Shmuel. There's a lot of numbers that are being thrown around when it comes to the support of the American public for this war. I saw a story in the New York Times this morning talking about how only 41% of Americans support the war. We have our own polling numbers that we've done in JPPI of Jewish Americans, and you also have numbers on Israeli Jews, not yet with Arab Israelis, but give us kind of just a quick map of where we're looking, how we're looking, polling, support of this operation in the U.S. and also here in Israel.
Well, I'll start with the easy part. Jewish Israelis support this war overwhelmingly. It's 85, close to 90% of Israeli Jews support the war. This doesn't necessarily mean that they will support the leader of the war or the coalition that leads the war. So when we get to this issue of unity, it's unity on this war. Support for the war is, again, it's overwhelming. There are very few people in Israel who doubt that there needed to be something to tame Iran, and they see the success and they support the war.
By the way, just sorry to interrupt, and you'll continue second, but Naftali Bennett, right, who's running against Bibi whenever the election will be held, there was a video that I saw of him yesterday saying, we promised that we would take on Iran. He kept on using the term we, and people are saying, dude, you're not in the government. Like, what is the we? But really, in the sense of this is, he stands completely with the government.
With the government, and we saw Yair Lapid explaining the operation in foreign languages in different countries. So the majority in Israel is clearly behind the war. We polled what we call the group that we call connected U.S. Jews. It's not the whole community, but these are Jews that we poll every month, and they are relatively connected to Judaism, to the community, to Israel. Among them, there is a majority of people who support the operation, but with a caveat. Many of them say that the goal of the operation should not be regime change. It should be a weakened Iran and hurting the nuclear facilities, but not the more ambitious plan for regime change. They also say, and this is something that we should take into consideration, a majority of them say that the war is going to damage Israel's image in the United States, and they are saying that the war is going to increase the level of anti-Semitism in the United States. So they see the war as something that needed to be done, which they support, but they also see the downside of this war, at least to the American Jewish community. Now, when you talk about the larger American public, I'd say the following. Donald Trump looked at precedents in history of support and opposition to wars, and he discovered something that is quite significant. It doesn't really matter what people say at the initiation of a war. People supported most Americans supported the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq back in the early 2000s when President Bush launched these operations. And then they soared on the wars when they got complicated.
Yeah, but the one I was thinking as you were saying this, the difference though is that came on the heels of 9/11, an attack against the American homeland.
That is true.
Which they're lacking now.
That is true, but President Trump is probably making the opposite calculation. He says, well, they don't truly support the current war. They don't truly understand what I'm doing. But when the regime falls, when Iran is no longer the Iran of the Ayatollahs, when I bring to the end this long, contentious relations between America and Iran, the Iran that President Carter lost back in the late 80s, then or the late 70s, then people will realize that I did the right thing and they will come around to support me. So right now they're cautious because they're afraid. They envision a repetition of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. They say, we don't want long wars. We don't want boots on the ground. We don't want to be dragged into the swamp. If this ends after a month or 2 months with very few American casualties and regime change, like some of the wars in Yugoslavia, they will come around to support me, and the numbers that we see today will no longer be significant. I think this is what he thinks is going to be the case, and that's why he sort of ignores public opinion when he decided to launch the war.
And I think that, this does look, I think we need American support, right? And we're seeing the US soldiers, I hate to, what do we call it? Liftoch pela satan, like, give an eye in hara, if people understand what that means. Evil eye. But thankfully, so far, we haven't lost any armed, servicemen in Israel. There have been casualties on the American side. I think it's 6 soldiers as of now, right? And the more that number goes up, that will change also the calculation in the United States. But it will also change and will also lead to criticism of Israel, because there is that movement, not just on the left, but also within the Republican Party itself, of where people are saying, why are American troops being killed on behalf of the state of Israel, a war that Israel dragged America into? And, Marco Rubio had an unfortunate comment, which he then tried to walk back, where he made it seem as if Israel was planning to attack anyhow, and therefore we decided it was better for us to join than not to join. The president later said, listen, no one, if anything, I dragged Israel into this. And I think it's less for Trump about making it seem that, defending Israel and making sure that Israel's liked in America. It's just more about, I'm the one in charge. No one tells me what to do. It's keeping with that ethos of who he is and how he is perceived. And that's, of course, I think something that will accompany us, and it will be part of his legacy here. No, Gil? I mean, this is something that Trump now really wants to set. And you see, like, again, going back to Hegseth, I really think people, if you haven't watched Pete Hegseth give those briefings, you got to, because it's like, I mean, he's in the character. He talks with this passion that you don't see. Like, we have Israel Katz. Israel Katz is our defense minister. I mean, it's really a whole different breed of people. I mean, like, but what do they want to do with this at the end, no matter how it ends, Gil?
So look, Trump has this remarkable ability both to delude himself and to spin so that it's always a win for him. And so we have to kind of distinguish between what Trump is going to say and how the reality will be perceived and what the reality actually is. It's actually three different levels. So first, look, one of the biggest things, and we're seeing this even with the fact that there are some American Jews who aren't completely bored, is that, we used to talk about foxhole conversions, that, you have a certain kind of clarity about God being with you when you're fighting the foxhole. I think there's also a kind of moral clarity that comes when you're at the receiving end of a ballistic missile and of drones. And Israelis, including Israeli Jews, feel it much more than American Jews, let alone Americans. And so that's where we really, really feel the threat. And that's why Trump needs the victory, and he needs as clear a victory as possible. Just in terms of the reality. Now, in terms of the spin, there's a bigger issue here, which is that Trump came in promising that he would be the guy to end the forever wars. And what he's trying to do, and so people decided, therefore he's not going to go into any kind of military conflict. We've seen in Venezuela and elsewhere that he actually is kind of enjoying the power that comes from being able to change everything with military. And, one of the things that we see, especially with second-term presidents, is that they learn how to use the military. Bill Clinton, for example, first term was very, very cautious about using the military in a way that actually kind of hurt him and undermined his credibility. And he regretted that he didn't help with the genocide, to stop the genocide in Rwanda. They didn't even use the word genocide because that would have forced them to act. And in Somalia, and then in his second term, all of a sudden, built up, but there's a 78-day bombing of Kosovo, which actually led to regime change from the air. And so we see the presidents kind of learn how to use that foreign policy muscle because you get results much more quickly than the grinding, painful, endless legislative process, even with a Donald Trump who tends to rush things along. And so I think what he's trying to do is say, look, I'm not the pacifist president. I'm not the no wars president. I'm the no endless wars president. And that's where, and it goes back to the beginning of our conversation too, when we start thinking about what's Trump's endgame here. Did he go in with a plan? How does he declare victory? How does he show, this is the new way of having power? And you know what? There's an argument to be made that having America be a little bit intimidating with a president, not just a Donald Trump, but future presidents who occasionally just go in quickly, make big moves, and then pull back, is not a terrible thing. It's certainly much less bad than having presidents who seem to just sort of telegraph a total fear of using armaments. Yeah. And so we actually might be in a very interesting historic transformation where Trump is trying to say, look, this is going to be my legacy. The domestic legacy is complicated. And the domestic politics are painful. And we should emphasize that, everybody's talking about how little support there is for Trump's for this move. But Trump's presidency also has seen a drop in support, certainly since the high days of his inauguration and his election. And so we know that when foreign policy actions are dramatic and effective and successful, that's a great way for presidents to get popularity. And I think he probably has some sense of how he can spin this and how he can declare a victory parade, even and run a victory parade, even if he doesn't get the regime change that he hopes for.
And listen, unpredictability is his huge asset, right? And like you said, if this was a Biden or an Obama, we would be able to really play out with pretty close accuracy, I would assume, how this is going to go, or how it was going to go, and how this never would have happened. But with Trump, you have that huge, just unknown, and it could really go any which way. But this brings me to the Israeli politics, because with all the talk now that Netanyahu, listen, Israel, I think everyone here knows, Israel has to go to an election by October. The budget has to pass by the end of this month. Unclear if that's even going to happen anymore because of the war, so there might be a delay to it. But either way, it does seem, and this is what's been coming out in the media, is that Netanyahu and the Likud feel that we should move up the election. Best to go in June and do it on the heels of this amazing victory. And I was thinking about this last night. I was on a radio interview, an Israeli radio interview, and I said that I was asked a similar question. I said the best campaigner that Netanyahu is going to have now is going to be Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump, no matter which way this goes, sideways, up, down, doesn't make a difference, Trump is going to declare victory. And then, of course, Netanyahu is going to declare victory. And wherever Netanyahu goes talking about victory, he's going to have Trump talking about victory. And that's just going to help him. So, Shmuel, when you think about the earlier election and having now Donald Trump totally in his corner, even if he's not going to come and actively campaign on his behalf, but every time he's going to talk about this, it's going to be about how me and Bibi took down the Iranians, and me and Bibi defeated and killed the Ayatollah, and me and Bibi did this. I mean, that's an asset that you can't pay for, right?
Well, remember that the pretext for such campaign was already initiated when Trump was awarded the Israel Prize. Right. So that there is a date for him to come. He can come here on for Independence Day, for Yom Ha'atzmaut, get the Israel Prize. This will be a month and a half before or 2 months before Election Day. So you get war, victory, Trump visit, election. Will this be a decisive victory that makes Netanyahu an inevitable next prime minister? I'm not sure that's the case. Remember that Netanyahu, after the pandemic, right after the corona, when Netanyahu was an exemplary leader for a country during the pandemic, he did some amazing things for Israel, some unprecedented policies that were initiated here. And yet he couldn't win an election, even though many Israelis, including Israelis who oppose Netanyahu, admitted that as a pandemic leader, he did a good job. You can make the same argument again. Netanyahu has a ceiling. There are many people who think that his time is up. And they could even make the counter argument. Okay, now he finished the job. That's what he wanted to do all along. When he was elected back in 1995, he said, Iran is the arch enemy that I'm going to fight until the bitter end. Now he defeated Iran. Okay, so it's time for him to go. Israel is polarized in a very unique sense, and very few people switch from one camp to the other. So I'm not sure the war certainly gives Netanyahu a better chance of winning the election, but will this be in fact a winning card that cannot be defeated by his opponents? I think it's premature to say such thing. I think a lot of it depends on the result of the war, what the outcome is, how the outcome is perceived by Israelis. Remember, we declared victory in Gaza.
Hamas is still in charge of half of Gaza.
We are not there yet. So by the end of June, things could look different to Israelis, even when it comes to Iran, if there's no regime change. If it's becoming clear that this round, like the latest round back in June, is not the last one, that this is going to be something that we have to repeat every half a year or every year, that's a different story. So again, the election is an open question. We can't yet say with any certainty that one side or the other is going to win the next election.
And as is always the case, it's nuanced and it's complex and it's complicated. And as I've long thought, October 7th is a coin with two sides. Well, there's a third, but at least here we have two sides. One is the failures that led to October 7th that he should own, he's trying to avoid. And the rest is the change, and the other side is the change to the Middle East and the safer and more secure reality that we now have today. That's to his credit. He is to blame, and he deserves the credit both at the same time. You can't say it's all me, what happened with Iran, but then say everything that happened on October 7th, that was the intelligence and the military guys who messed up and didn't wake me up. I mean, it's one and the same, and that's okay, by the way, right? I mean, I think that's the right way to look at it. So I'm happy to praise him, and I really do. I think that what he's done for Israel, definitely in this war. I personally thought that what we saw in the June war with America flying those B-2 bombers was the highest level of integration that we would see. And now what we've seen here is a whole other level of this, and that is that he deserves that credit.
And that's before you see the Saudi Air Force joining in, or some other air forces.
Listen, if that happens, the Messiah has arrived, I think, right? But in the same vein, you can't avoid still the investigation and the commission of inquiry that we do still need. So I look at it in both ways. But I really want to thank both of you, Shmuel and Gil, for joining me as always, shedding some light on a very difficult and very important period in Israel's history and in the history of this region and Jewish people. And to all our viewers and listeners, thanks for being with us this week. We'll be back on next week with more from the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. In the meantime, stay safe, stay sheltered if you're here in the region in Israel or elsewhere in the Middle East, and have a Shabbat Shalom.